I just saw the new John Watts movie starring Brad Pitt and George Clooney, Wolves, and I have some thoughts that I'd like to share with you guys, so let's get into it. So Wolves is basically some of the most 2005 to 2010 stuff that I've ever seen, and I actually think it's quite refreshing to see. This film is really just hinging on the star power alone. The characters in this film aren't really even named. It's just Brad Pitt and George Clooney in a movie together. We know what they can do together. They've been in a bunch of movies, whether that's the Ocean's films or something like a Coen Brothers film. They work quite well with each other and they have great rapport, and they're basically just continuing that on here with Wolves. This is directed by John Watts, who made a bunch of the MCU Spider-Man films, and as a director, I don't think he has too much of a visual style or anything like that, and that continues on once again here. It is a pretty bland movie to look at. Once again, that's not really the selling point. I think John Watts within this film is almost intentionally being invisible because, once again, this is purely hinging off the star power of Brad Pitt and George Clooney. And even though this film is very mediocre and very forgettable, I kind of liked watching it. You know, movies like this are good to have. They're just quite refreshing, especially when you have so many big, gigantic projects. It's just a good little diversity, a good little mix to have something like this thrown in where you can just put it on and have a good time with it and move on with your life. That's what this film is. I don't want films like this overcrowding the space, but just put in there every now and again is quite nice. And to utilize, once again, the star power of the movie is a great little way of kind of taking us back to that time when everything was about the star power. It just felt like a throwback in a very interesting way, and I just found it quite refreshing. I think this film has an excellent opening sequence that really drew me in and manages to get us into the flow of things with this big dramatic moment that begins the film and forcing these two characters to meet. And they play well off each other, Brad Pitt and George Clooney. They have excellent rapport here. There's some great back and forth. Some of it I don't even think was written. Some of it was probably improvised, and I quite like that. You have George Clooney, the old and grizzled fixer. These two characters are fixers. They're trying to help someone clean up a death so it never happened. And George Clooney is the experienced one who knows what he's doing and doesn't want to get mixed in with anyone. And then you have Brad Pitt, who is kind of the new up-and-comer in a way and is considered very, very highly regarded. And George Clooney just doesn't rate him. So you just have this instant back and forth where one thinks he knows everything that he's doing, the other one is arrogant and cocky. And over the course of the film, they do play with that. There's a lot of comedy there, and naturally it just goes to some pretty predictable places. I feel like the structure of this movie isn't trying to reinvent the wheel, but I did like the way it started off. George Clooney is very smooth, Brad Pitt is very charismatic and has all these witty one-liners, and it feels very meta in a way because it is almost talking about these two as actors and their careers over time. And I think it is just a nice little homage to these two actors that have dominated the spotlight for many, many years. And what made this a little bit more interesting to me was that it did have some scenes that felt like it had a little bit more than just, oh hey, it's just these two together again. The opening sequence felt like that, and moments when it was getting close to wrapping up in the third act, there were some moments that made you think, oh, is this actually going to happen or is it not? And those kinds of moments did draw me into the movie a little bit more and gave me something else to care about. There is this young adult in this film who I think is a nice part of the dynamic between Brad Pitt and George Clooney. He adds another layer to the film that just makes it even more interesting. It is built on the charisma of the stars of the movie, and some nice action sequences and some really good stunt work. There is a chase sequence within the film that I think highlights the most creativity of the film and feels like it's just going for it. You feel like there's a little bit more money thrown at the screen in this sequence because it's just great stunt work. It's pretty basic in terms of the scene. There's not gigantic explosions or massive set pieces, but it's just a nice car chase that is very stylish, very smooth. It's well shot. And there is a great moment of slow motion that I quite liked. It played into the comedy of the film quite nicely. There's just little moments like that that, once again, throw me back to that time, 10, 15 years ago, and I really enjoyed that. And yeah, in terms of negatives, I am not really going to think about this movie, a month from now. This movie is so plain, so bland. It's uninspired in terms of stylistic choices. The narrative could go to some more interesting places and refuses to. It feels really predictable. There's a lot of things here that don't necessarily work. I think Brad Pitt and George Clooney have had some incredible roles in the past. Brad Pitt is one of my favorite actors ever. I really love his style of acting, and seeing him in Tarantino movies or something like Moneyball, performances that really stick out to me. And George Clooney is no different. He has had a plethora of great performances, and it is a little bit disappointing sometimes to see them in a film where it just requires no effort from them at all, or the bare minimum. It is feeling like a movie where they're getting a paycheck for this pretty basic movie, and that's it. And that is a little bit disappointing considering that these two actors have done so much better stuff in the past and will probably continue to do some more interesting stuff. I mean, Brad Pitt has that F1 movie coming out next year. Looks very interesting. I'm sure he's going to have a pretty decent performance in that. So just on that side of things, you do want to see a little bit more from these performers. I think they've grown to a point where they're almost above this now. So there is that element to it. But once again, there is a part of me that does like this movie and finds it entertaining and was happy to see it. As a whole, Wolves is not the greatest movie ever. It's not one that you need to go rush out and see, but if you have an extra 2 hours, you want to kill some time, you want to watch a decent enough movie on streaming, I think you can do a lot worse than this. This is just a fun enough time. It will keep you entertained from start to finish. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It has some great charismatic performances and some nice, decent enough moments that will pull you through the movie and keep you interested enough, despite how generic it may feel or uninspired it can be at times. As a score, I'm going to give Wolves a 3.5 out of 5 because I had so much fun with it, and I'm just more receptive to a film like this where it is just there to give you a good time and let you move on with your day. I think that is quite nice, and once again, it is nice to have as just a little palate cleanser or something where you just don't have to think as much. These kinds of movies are sometimes made for me in a sense where I can just relax, sit down, have a good time with these two stars that are so charismatic, and then go and anticipate the next big film that's coming out. I think it's just great in between these massive projects that we get throughout the year. Those are my thoughts towards Wolves. Let me know what you think about this movie in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.